The first time I felt it was on a Tuesday. It was the smallest thing, hardly noticeable. I was sitting on the couch, flicking through old photos, something I rarely did. You know how it is. You take a look at old pictures, and suddenly the past doesn't seem so distant anymore. You start remembering things, little moments you thought you'd forgotten. But as I was lost in one of those memories, Clara, my wife, walked into the room and didn't say a word. Now, I'm not talking about a huge shift here. It wasn't some dramatic thing that sent warning bells off in my head. No, it was something subtler. The way she moved past me, almost like she didn't notice I was there. Like I was just another piece of furniture. I didn't even react at first. We'd been married for 37 years. Long enough to know that sometimes people just need their space. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. She had always been the one who would stop to ask about my day or joke about something silly we had done. That day, she didn't even glance my way. I didn't mention it to her. I figured it was probably nothing. But that feeling had stayed with me. The next day was no different. I was sitting in my usual spot at the kitchen table, reading the paper like I had every morning for the past 3 decades. Clara walked in, poured herself a cup of coffee, and went straight to the living room. Again, no greeting. Just a quiet, almost robotic movement. It was like she was avoiding me, but in a way that made it seem natural. Like there was no reason for me to question it. And that's when it hit me. There was no real reason to question anything at all. I mean, why would I? Everything had been perfectly fine, hadn't it? But, for the first time in years, I felt a chill creeping in. I knew I had to be imagining it. After all, this was Clara. The woman who'd spent 3 decades of her life with me, building something we both thought would last forever. We had our problems, sure. But we were a team. Or, at least, I thought we were. By Thursday, I couldn't ignore it any longer. The coldness, the distance, it wasn't just in her actions, it was in the air between us. It wasn't like she was upset with me, at least not overtly. She still smiled when she spoke to me, still did the little things she always did, like making sure I had my favorite coffee in the morning or reminding me to take my medication. But it all felt forced. That night, I decided to check her phone. Now, I know what you're thinking, and I don't need anyone lecturing me about privacy. But when you've been with someone for nearly 4 decades, and things start to feel off, you start wondering if you're missing something. If there's something they're hiding. I'm not proud of it, but I had to know. I picked up her phone, unlocked it with the code she'd never changed, and started scrolling. At first, there was nothing unusual. Texts from friends, emails, work stuff. But then I came across a message thread with a name I didn't recognize. It wasn't a number. This was someone she had saved in her contacts. And it wasn't the content that caught me off guard. It was the way she signed off the messages. Love you. That simple phrase, it hit me like a punch to the gut. I sat there, staring at the screen, not sure how to react. I didn't know what this meant. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe it was a friend, someone she joked with. But the word love wasn't something she threw around lightly, at least not with anyone but me. I had to know more. I kept scrolling, and the further I went back, the more unsettling the messages became. There were talks about meeting up, plans made with strange codes and references to places I hadn't heard of. The messages weren't just casual. There was an intimacy in them, a closeness, that made my stomach turn. What was happening? How long had this been going on? I didn't want to believe it. I wanted to dismiss it all, but the doubt was creeping in, thick and fast. The world around me felt like it was closing in. How could this happen? How could she? How could Clara, my wife of 37 years, be involved in something like this? I put the phone down, and for the first time in a long while, I couldn't breathe. It wasn't just the realization that something was wrong. It was the uncertainty, the not knowing. How had I missed all of this? How had I not seen the signs? I didn't confront her that night. I couldn't. I was too shocked, too lost in my own thoughts to form a sentence. I told myself I needed time to process, to figure out what to do next. But deep down, I knew I couldn't just ignore it. Something was happening, and it wasn't going away. And that's when I made the decision. I couldn't live with the doubt anymore. I needed to find out the truth. The following morning, I made plans I knew would change everything. I didn't know where they would lead, but I knew I couldn't go on pretending that everything was okay. Little did I know, the truth was far stranger and more devastating than I could ever imagine. It was the weekend before everything changed. I remember waking up early on Saturday, a habit I'd fallen into in recent years. The sun wasn't up yet, and the house was still quiet. Clara was still asleep, which was unusual. She always woke up early, even before me. But that morning, she lay there, her breathing steady but oddly still, like she was in a deep, undisturbed sleep. I got out of bed quietly, trying not to disturb her. I moved to the kitchen, making my coffee like I did every morning. The usual creak of the floorboards beneath my feet felt louder than ever, as if they were echoing my growing anxiety. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the steam rising from my cup, trying to make sense of what had happened over the last few days. The phone messages, the subtle distance in Clara's eyes, the unexplained late nights. I couldn't push it out of my mind. It had all been building, little by little, until now, it was impossible to ignore. I tried to rationalize it, tried to tell myself it was just a phase. Maybe she was stressed at work, maybe we were just in a rut. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. Something had changed, something I couldn't explain, but I couldn't ignore it any longer. Clara woke up around 9 a.m. She came into the kitchen, smiling like she always did, her usual warmth returning for a moment. I tried to act normal. I wanted to pretend nothing was wrong, that everything was fine. But I couldn't. "Good morning," she said, her voice light, as if nothing had shifted between us. "Morning," I muttered back, my voice more distant than I intended. She seemed to notice the change in my tone. Her eyes flicked to mine, but then she quickly turned her attention to the coffee machine. It was like she knew something was off, too, but neither of us was ready to address it. The silence that followed felt heavy, and I found myself watching her, scrutinizing her every move. The way she stirred her coffee, the way she shifted uncomfortably under my gaze. It wasn't a look of guilt. No, it was something else. It was like she was waiting for me to say something. But I didn't. Instead, I decided to leave. I needed to clear my head, get out of the house for a while. So I grabbed my jacket and left for a walk. I didn't have any particular destination in mind. I just needed the space, the fresh air. But as I walked down the street, something strange happened. I couldn't stop thinking about Clara. Her face kept popping into my mind. Those little moments when she seemed so distant, when she seemed to be looking past me instead of at me. It was like I was losing her, but she was still here, still physically present. And the worst part? I didn't know how to fix it. I walked for hours, my mind racing the entire time. When I finally returned, Clara was sitting in the living room, staring out the window. The house was so quiet, too quiet. It was like everything was on the edge of something, waiting for the inevitable to happen. "Where did you go?" she asked, looking up at me with that same pleasant smile, though there was something uneasy about it now. "I just needed some time," I replied, keeping my voice calm, though the storm inside me was brewing. She nodded but didn't say anything more. Instead, she went back to gazing out the window. I watched her for a moment, trying to figure out what she was thinking. I wondered if she knew what I had found on her phone, if she knew the questions that were swirling in my head. And then, out of nowhere, she stood up abruptly. "I'm going out for a while," she said, her voice too casual, too nonchalant. I felt the words catch in my throat. "Where are you going?" I asked before I could stop myself. Clara hesitated, and for the briefest moment, I saw something flicker in her eyes, a flash of guilt, maybe. "Just meeting a friend," she said quickly, but I could tell she was lying. She grabbed her coat and headed for the door, not giving me a chance to respond. "Clara, wait." I called after her, but she was already gone. I stood there, alone in the quiet house, feeling the weight of her absence settle over me. Something was happening, something I couldn't explain. The pieces were falling into place, but the picture they were forming was one I didn't want to see. I sat down on the couch, trying to make sense of everything. Clara's odd behavior, the strange messages, her sudden need for space. It was all pointing to something I didn't want to face. But I couldn't ignore it any longer. I had to know the truth. I had to find out what was really going on. As the hours dragged on, I thought about everything I had seen. The texts, the secrets, the lies that had been hidden in plain sight. I thought about Clara, the woman I had spent my life with, the woman I trusted more than anyone. But trust was something I couldn't afford anymore. And that was when I made my decision. I had to confront her. I had to ask her about the messages, about the lies. I had to hear it from her own mouth, no matter how much it hurt. The waiting was killing me, and if I didn't do something, I was going to lose my mind. When Clara came home, I was ready. I had no idea how this conversation would go, but I knew one thing for sure. It was going to change everything. But I didn't realize just how much it would change until she walked through that door. When Clara walked back into the house that evening, something was different. Her expression wasn't the usual carefree smile I had come to expect. There was a certain tension in the way she carried herself, something guarded in her eyes that I had never seen before. I had to remind myself to breathe, to remain calm, but inside, my pulse was racing. I had made the decision. Tonight, I would confront her. There was no more pretending, no more waiting. The truth had to come out. She closed the door quietly behind her and took off her coat, glancing at me briefly. For a moment, we just stood there, silently assessing each other, neither of us speaking. It felt like a cold standoff, the kind you see in a movie, but it was real, and it was happening between us. "So, where did you go?" I asked, my voice betraying more anxiety than I intended. The words came out, but they didn't sound like the simple question I meant them to be. It was as if I was trying to figure out her entire life from just a few words. Clara hesitated for just a moment before answering. "I told you, just meeting a friend." Her voice was soft, but a little too soft, almost like she was trying to convince herself, not me. "I see," I said, trying to keep my tone neutral, but my mind was already a step ahead. It was hard to ignore that everything about her story didn't add up. The lies weren't just small ones. They were calculated, and I could feel it deep in my gut. I stood up, trying to steady myself. My heart was pounding, my thoughts a tangled mess of confusion. But there was one thing I knew for sure. I couldn't let this go any longer. "Clara, we need to talk." "Really talk," I said. My voice sounded strange in my own ears, like it wasn't mine. It felt like everything was falling into place, like a dam about to break. Her face faltered for a second, just the smallest flicker of hesitation. I saw her eyes dart to the door, like she was weighing whether or not she could leave again. But she didn't. She just stood there, watching me, the tension in the room thick enough to cut with a knife. "About what?" she asked, though I knew she already knew what was coming. "About everything," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "The texts, the lies, the late nights. Clara, what's going on? I need to know." Her face softened, but not in a way that reassured me. It was the kind of softness that signals a person preparing for a fight, getting ready to defend themselves. "George," she said, her voice taking on that careful, controlled tone that always made me wary. "I don't know what you're talking about." I felt a cold sweat start to form on the back of my neck. Was she really going to deny it all? Even after what I had seen with my own eyes? I didn't answer right away. Instead, I walked over to the counter where I had left her phone earlier. I picked it up, and for a moment, I just stared at it, as if the device itself held the key to everything. Without looking at her, I spoke again, my voice low, almost shaking. "Clara, I found your messages. I know you've been seeing someone else. Don't lie to me. Not now." For the briefest of moments, I saw her face freeze. Her eyes widened slightly, her lips parted as though she was about to speak, but no words came out. It was only for a fraction of a second, but in that moment, I knew. I knew everything I needed to know. She was hiding something from me, and now it was too late for her to deny it. Clara took a deep breath and finally spoke. "George, it's not what you think." Her voice was steady now, but I could hear the cracks in it. She was trying to control the situation, trying to make it sound like it wasn't as bad as I thought. But I wasn't buying it anymore. "Then explain it to me," I said, my voice growing more impatient, more desperate. "Explain why you've been lying. Explain why you've been so distant. And tell me who he is, Clara. I deserve to know." The words felt like they were clawing their way out of me, and for the first time, I wasn't afraid to speak them. Clara swallowed hard, clearly struggling with what to say. She seemed torn between saying something and keeping it all locked inside. Finally, she spoke, her voice low, almost defeated. "His name is Evan. He's someone I met a while ago. It started off innocently, but things just got out of hand." I stared at her, trying to process her words. Evan, who was this person? I thought back to all the times Clara had been working late, or had claimed to be busy. How long had this been going on? And why hadn't I noticed? The shame of not seeing it sooner hit me like a freight train. I had been so consumed with my own routines, my own comfort, that I never once thought to look closer. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears. I wanted to scream, to shout, to demand more answers. But instead, I stood there frozen, my entire world slowly crumbling around me. "How long?" was all I could manage to say. "About 6 months," she whispered, her eyes dropping to the floor. I never meant for it to happen, George. But I don't know what to say anymore. I never thought you'd find out this way. 6 months. 6 months of betrayal, and I had been completely oblivious. My heart felt like it was being squeezed in a vice. My mind raced as I tried to wrap my head around the magnitude of what she had just admitted. How could she have done this? And how could I have been so blind? For the next few moments, the room was silent except for the sound of our breathing. I couldn't speak. I didn't know what to say. What could I say? I had never prepared myself for this. In all my years of marriage, I had never thought this could happen to me. But here it was, right in front of me, impossible to ignore. Clara, I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. Why didn't you just tell me? Why did you keep it a secret? She looked at me then, her eyes filled with guilt and something else. Regret, maybe, but also fear. I didn't know how. I didn't know how to tell you that I had fallen out of love with you, and I didn't want to hurt you. Fallen out of love. Those words felt like a slap in the face. But in some twisted way, I understood. She hadn't just betrayed me physically. She had betrayed the very foundation of everything I had believed in. Our relationship, our history, it had all been a lie. But that was just the beginning of what was about to unfold. What Clara said next would change everything again. I'm leaving, George. The words hung in the air between us like a heavy fog, suffocating and cold. I'm leaving, George. Clara's voice cracked just slightly as she said it, but her resolve was undeniable. I stood frozen, the shock of her admission still settling in, like a brick sinking slowly to the pit of my stomach. I had heard the words, but it didn't feel real. It didn't feel like she was talking about us, about our life together, the life I thought we had. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. All I could do was stare at her, waiting for her to say something else, to take it back, to tell me that this was all just some terrible mistake. But she didn't. Instead, she simply looked at me with a mixture of sadness and determination, as though she had already made her decision and was now waiting for me to catch up to it. For a moment, everything was quiet. The weight of her words, the weight of the reality settling over us, was unbearable. I had spent 37 years building a life with Clara, a life I thought was solid, unshakable. And yet, in the blink of an eye, it was all falling apart. I wanted to ask her so many things. How long had she felt this way? Was it really over for her? Did she ever really love me the way I loved her? But nothing came out. It was like my voice had been stolen. Instead, I just stood there, watching her, feeling like the world around me was crumbling into dust. Clara took a step toward the door, her movements deliberate. I don't think she expected me to stop her, but I couldn't just let her walk out like this. Not without saying something, anything. Where are you going? I finally asked, my voice rough, unfamiliar. I'm going to stay with Evan, she said, her eyes never leaving mine. There it was again, the name I had never wanted to hear. The name that had been haunting me in the back of my mind for weeks. I need to figure things out, George. I can't keep living this lie. The room spun around me as I processed her words. Stay with Evan? So it wasn't just some affair, it was a full-on relationship. Clara had fallen in love with this man, and now she was choosing him over me. The betrayal stung in a way I couldn't put into words. It wasn't just that she had broken my trust, it was that she had already made her choice. And it wasn't me. I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came out. What could I say? How could I convince her to stay when she had already made up her mind? The thought of her leaving, of her walking out that door and never coming back, was more than I could handle. But then, as if in some cruel twist of fate, something inside me snapped. You think it's that easy? You think you can just walk away and leave everything behind? The words came out harshly, unfiltered, and I hated myself for it. But I couldn't stop them. It felt like all the anger, all the frustration that had been building inside me for weeks had finally erupted. Clara flinched at my tone, but she didn't back down. Instead, she took a deep breath and looked me in the eyes. I don't want to hurt you, George. I never did. But I can't keep pretending anymore. I can't keep living in a marriage that isn't real for me. And I owe it to myself to be honest, even if it's the hardest thing I've ever done. The tears started to well up in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to plead. If she had made her decision, then there was nothing more I could do. Still, the thought of her leaving, of her walking away from everything we had, hit me like a punch to the gut. I had spent decades building this life with her. How could it all come down to this? How could everything we'd worked for be so easily dismissed? Clara moved towards the door, her hand resting on the handle, and for a moment, I thought she might turn back. Maybe she would see the pain in my eyes, maybe she would regret it, and maybe, just maybe, she would stay. But instead, she gave me one last look, a mixture of sorrow and resolve, and opened the door. Before she stepped out, she turned to me one last time. "I'm sorry, George," she whispered, "but I need to go. I need to be honest with myself, and I need to find a way forward. Without you." The door closed behind her with a finality that sent a jolt of shock through me. It was over. Clara was gone. The woman I had loved for so long, the woman I had trusted with my entire life, was leaving me for someone else. I stood there for what felt like hours, unable to move, unable to process what had just happened. The reality of it all was still sinking in, still hitting me like waves crashing over me, drowning me in disbelief and pain. But I couldn't cry. Not yet. I wasn't ready to break down, not in front of the empty house that used to be full of us. I had to hold it together, at least for now. But as the minutes dragged on, I felt the weight of the silence pressing down on me. The house, once filled with the sounds of our life together, was now eerily quiet. And in that silence, I heard the unmistakable truth. I had lost her. And the worst part? I hadn't seen it coming. The silence in the house was deafening. The kind of silence that fills every inch of space, suffocating you, making it hard to breathe. Clara was gone, and I was left standing in the middle of an empty home, surrounded by 37 years of memories that suddenly felt like they belonged to someone else. Everything about the house felt wrong now, like it was holding on to something it shouldn't. The photographs on the walls, the familiar creaks of the floorboards beneath my feet, everything was tainted. I could still feel the echo of her presence, but it wasn't the same. The warmth had evaporated, leaving only cold, empty space. I couldn't tell you how long I stood there, just staring at the door she had walked through. It felt like hours, though in reality, it was probably only minutes. Time seemed to stretch, and I felt trapped in it. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to punch the walls until my fists bled, but I did none of that. Instead, I just stood there, motionless, as if waiting for some kind of answer to come crashing through the door behind me. But there was no answer. There was only the quiet that she had left in her wake. I don't know how long I waited, but eventually, my mind snapped back to reality. My first thought was to call her, find out where she was, demand that she come back. But then, just as quickly, the rational side of me took over. I knew calling her would be pointless. I knew she had made her decision. She had walked out of the door, and nothing I said or did would bring her back. Not now. I went into the living room and sank down onto the couch. I looked around, almost expecting the house to offer me some kind of comfort, but there was nothing. The walls felt like they were closing in. The truth was there, looming over me like a shadow I couldn't outrun. Clara had left me, and she hadn't just left physically. She had checked out emotionally a long time ago. How had I missed it? How had I not seen the signs? All those late nights, the quiet moments when she seemed distant, the things she said that didn't add up, all of them had been there. And I had chosen not to see them. I pulled my phone out of my pocket, staring at the screen. It was filled with messages, calls, notifications that seemed so meaningless now. I didn't know what I was hoping to find. Some sign that everything could be fixed, that somehow things could go back to the way they were. But I didn't find that. All I found was emptiness. It was then that I realized how much I had neglected my own life, my own needs, my own desires. I had spent so many years focusing on Clara, on our life together, that I had lost sight of who I was. I had let myself become so consumed by her, by the idea of the perfect marriage, that I had forgotten how to be me. The feeling of being betrayed was overwhelming, but it wasn't just about Clara. It was about me, too. How had I let myself become so blind to what was happening in front of me? How had I allowed this to go on for so long without questioning it? I wasn't just angry with her. I was angry with myself. Angry that I had been so willing to ignore the cracks in our relationship because I was too afraid to face the truth. I sat there for hours, the darkness of the evening creeping in around me, before I finally did something I hadn't done in years. I called a friend. His name was Mark, an old colleague of mine from work, someone I hadn't spoken to in a while. I didn't know why I called him. Maybe because I needed to hear another human voice. Maybe because I needed someone to remind me that I wasn't completely alone. "Hey," Mark, I said when he picked up, my voice sounding unfamiliar to me. It's George. George. Long time, no talk. What's up, man? His voice was warm, friendly, like nothing had changed. But I could hear the edge of concern in it when he asked, "You okay?" I paused for a moment, unsure of how to explain the mess of emotions I was feeling. "No, Mark. I'm not okay." My words came out in a rush, like I had been holding them in for too long. Clara, she left me. There was a long silence on the other end of the line, and I could hear Mark processing what I had said. "What do you mean, she left you? Like for good?" "Yeah," I replied, my voice hollow. "She told me she's been seeing someone else. She's gone. She's with him now." Mark's voice softened. "Jesus, George. I'm so sorry, man. That's rough. Do you want to talk about it?" I didn't know if I wanted to talk about it, but I needed to. I needed to say it out loud, to hear someone else acknowledge the pain I was feeling. I don't even know how to process this. I spent so many years with her, and now it feels like everything was a lie. "I get it," Mark said, his tone understanding. "But listen, George, you can't blame yourself for this. People change. Relationships change. It sucks, but you're going to get through it. You need to take care of yourself now. It's not just about her anymore. It's about you." I wanted to believe him, wanted to take his words to heart, but the pain of it all was too raw. How could I just move on? How could I let go of 37 years in the blink of an eye? It felt impossible. But as Mark continued to talk, offering words of comfort, I felt something begin to shift inside me. Maybe it wasn't going to be easy. Maybe it wasn't going to be quick. But I had to start thinking about what came next. Because this wasn't the end of my life. It was just the beginning of something else. After I hung up with Mark, I sat in the dark for a long time, just thinking. There was no easy way forward, but I had to take it. I couldn't stay stuck in this house, in this pain. Clara had made her choice. Now it was time for me to make mine. But there was one thing I knew for sure. I was done living in the past. The world was moving forward, and I had to do the same. Even if it meant facing the hardest truth of all. Even if it meant starting over completely. Clara had made her choice. Now it was my turn. It had been a few days since Clara left. A few long, excruciating days that felt more like weeks. The house was eerily quiet, and the absence of her presence was more overwhelming than I had expected. At first, I kept walking through the rooms, expecting to see her there, her coat hanging by the door, her shoes scattered around the living room, her voice humming softly in the background. But every time I looked around, there was nothing. Just silence, just emptiness. The life we had built, the love I thought we shared, all felt like it had slipped through my fingers, and I was powerless to stop it. I spent the first few days in a daze. I didn't want to talk to anyone, didn't want to answer calls. I hid away from the world, too afraid to face the reality of what had happened. Friends reached out, but I ignored their messages, unsure of what to say, unsure of what I even wanted. But as the days passed, something shifted within me. Slowly, the anger and sadness began to blend together into something else, something more powerful, something that felt like the first steps toward reclaiming my life. It was a Tuesday evening when I finally made the decision. I had been staring at my reflection in the bathroom mirror for what felt like an eternity, my mind a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts and emotions. The man looking back at me was unrecognizable, my face drawn and tired, my eyes weary and hollow. I had spent so much time being the person I thought I was supposed to be for Clara, for our family. I had spent so many years thinking that the life I had built with her was the only one that mattered. But now, I was left standing in the ruins of that life, unsure of who I was anymore. That's when it hit me. If I didn't do something, I would lose myself completely. It wasn't just about Clara anymore, it was about me. I couldn't let her decisions, her betrayal, define the rest of my life. I had spent so long being there for her, being the man she needed, that I had forgotten about my own needs. But that had to stop. I couldn't stay in this limbo. I had to take control of my future, whatever it looked like. I walked out of the bathroom, my resolve hardening with every step. I had made my decision. I wasn't going to wait for Clara to come back or for her to fix things. I wasn't going to sit here, wallowing in self-pity, hoping that somehow everything would magically return to normal. If I wanted to move on, I had to make it happen. The first step was calling the lawyer. I didn't want to. There was a part of me that wanted to hold on to the hope that things could be fixed, that maybe Clara and I could somehow find a way back to each other. But deep down, I knew that wasn't going to happen. Not anymore. The lawyer's office was quiet when I called. The woman on the other end of the line polite and efficient as she scheduled an appointment. I hung up the phone and sat back, my hands trembling slightly. It wasn't easy to make this decision. It wasn't easy to admit that my marriage was over, that the woman I had loved for so long was never coming back. But it was the only choice I had left. The next few days were a blur. I met with the lawyer, signed the papers, and began the long, painful process of untangling my life from Clara's. It wasn't just about dividing up assets and figuring out the logistics of living alone for the first time in decades. It was about confronting everything I had ignored for so long, everything I had sacrificed for the sake of a relationship that wasn't even real anymore. I had to look at the parts of myself that I had buried away, the parts that had been neglected for years, and begin the slow process of rediscovering who I was outside of my marriage. But the hardest part, the part that I couldn't seem to shake, was the memory of Clara. The thought of her with someone else, the thought of her moving on so easily while I was left behind, was something I couldn't quite reconcile. The anger I felt toward her was consuming, but there was also a deep ache inside of me, a longing for the woman I thought I knew, the woman I thought would be by my side forever. One night, I found myself driving through the familiar streets, my mind drifting to memories of better times, times when Clara and I would take walks together, hand in hand, without a care in the world. I could still see her smile, the way her eyes would light up when she laughed. I could still hear her voice, soft and reassuring, telling me everything would be okay. But that woman was gone, and the woman who had left me was someone I didn't recognize. I pulled into a parking lot, shutting off the engine and sitting in the car for a long moment. It was strange. I had been so consumed with anger and pain, so focused on what Clara had done to me, that I hadn't stopped to think about what this meant for me. What did I want? What was I going to do now? It was then that I realized how much I had neglected my own happiness, how much I had put my life on hold for a marriage that was no longer healthy. I had to find a way to move forward, to heal, to rebuild. I didn't know what that would look like yet, but I knew I couldn't keep living in the past. I took a deep breath and made a promise to myself. I was going to reclaim my life. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't happen overnight, but I had to start somewhere. I had to begin the process of healing, even if I didn't know how. And it all started with one simple decision: to let go of the past and focus on the future. Clara had made her choice, and now it was my turn. I didn't know where this new journey would take me, but for the first time in a long while, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, I could find my way back to happiness. It was going to be a long road, but I was finally ready to take the first step. It's strange, the way time moves after a life-changing event. At first, everything feels suspended, like you're standing still while the world continues on around you. And then, suddenly, you find yourself moving forward in small, unsure steps, not really knowing where you're going, but just trying to get there. The days after Clara left were like that, slow, painful, but moving nonetheless. I went through the motions of my daily life, but nothing felt the same. I would wake up in the morning, make coffee, sit at the same table we had shared for years, and pretend that the emptiness surrounding me didn't weigh a ton. But it did. Every day felt like I was carrying a weight on my shoulders, a constant reminder that my life had been turned upside down. I had signed the papers. I had taken the first steps toward moving on, but it felt like I was drowning in the aftermath. The house was quieter than it had ever been, and every corner, every room, held a piece of our past. I could see Clara in every inch of this place. The kitchen where we made dinner together, the living room where we watched movies, the bedroom where we slept. The memories were suffocating, and yet, they were all I had left. It was easier, in some ways, when I had my anger. When I was angry, I had a focus. I could direct that energy into something, even if it was just making sure that I didn't collapse under the weight of the situation. But when the anger faded, I was left with the emptiness, the grief, the heartache that I didn't know how to process. How could she do this to me? How could someone I had spent so many years with, someone I had trusted, just leave like that? It felt like a betrayal of everything we had built. I tried to stay busy. I went back to work, started spending more time with friends, even went for long walks to clear my head. But nothing worked. There were moments when I would forget, even just for a second, that Clara was gone. I would reach for the phone to call her, to ask her how her day was, to hear her voice. And then, The realization would hit me like a wave, crashing down and pulling me under again. She wasn't here anymore, and she wasn't coming back. The worst part wasn't even the loneliness, although that was bad enough. No, the hardest part was the self-doubt that kept creeping in. What had I done wrong? What had I missed? There were nights when I would lie awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, and wonder where I had failed. Was I not enough for her? Had I changed in a way that made her fall out of love with me? And then the guilt would rush in. The guilt that maybe I hadn't been as present as I should have been, that I hadn't noticed the signs, that I hadn't tried harder to save our marriage. I remember one particular night, sitting alone in the living room. It was late, and the house was dark, save for the light from the lamp I had left on. I wasn't tired, but I was exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. I could hear the faint ticking of the clock on the wall, the only sound in the room, and I found myself staring at it, counting the seconds as they passed. That was when it hit me. This was my new reality. This was it. The life I thought I had was gone. I wasn't a husband anymore. I wasn't part of the team I had built with Clara. I was just a man, alone in a house full of memories. I wanted to fight it, to deny it, but I couldn't. The more I tried to push it away, the more it consumed me. I knew I had to let go of the past, but letting go was harder than I could have ever imagined. The longer I held on, the more it hurt. But the thought of moving forward was terrifying. What did that even mean? What was I supposed to do with myself now? And then, something changed. I had a conversation with Mark, my old friend, who had been trying to get me out of the house for weeks. He called me one afternoon and suggested we meet for lunch. I almost said no. I wasn't ready to face anyone, let alone pretend that everything was okay. But then I realized I had been hiding from the world long enough. Maybe it was time to take a small step toward something, even if it was just getting out of the house for a few hours. We met at a small cafe in the city, a place we used to go to when we were younger, back when life seemed so simple. Mark was waiting outside when I pulled up, his familiar face offering a warm smile as I got out of the car. He was the same as always, easygoing, confident, and full of life. But there was a softness in his eyes when he saw me, something that told me he was worried. "Hey man," he greeted me with a clap on the back. "How have you been holding up?" I shrugged, forcing a smile. "You know, one day at a time." We sat down at a table near the window, and for the first time in a while, I felt a small sense of relief. I didn't have to pretend here. I didn't have to act like I was fine when I clearly wasn't. Mark didn't ask any probing questions. He just let the silence stretch between us until I was ready to talk. And eventually, I did. "I don't know what to do anymore, Mark." I confessed, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to move on. I don't know who I am without Clara." Mark nodded, his expression softening. "You're not alone in this, George. You're going to get through it. But you have to give yourself time. Time to grieve, time to process, and time to figure out what comes next. It's not going to happen overnight, and it's not going to be easy. But you have to take that first step. Otherwise, you're going to keep spinning your wheels, stuck in the past." His words hit me harder than I expected. I had been so focused on the pain, on the anger, on the things I couldn't control, that I hadn't stopped to think about the future. I hadn't stopped to think about what I wanted or needed to heal. For the first time since Clara left, I realized that I had to stop looking back. I couldn't change the past. I couldn't undo what had been done. But I could start moving forward, even if it was just one small step at a time. It wouldn't be easy. In fact, it would probably be one of the hardest things I'd ever do. But for the first time in a long while, I felt something stir inside of me. A glimmer of hope, a faint spark that told me maybe, just maybe, I could find my way back to happiness. I didn't know how or when, but I knew it was time to start. And that was enough. It's funny how life can surprise you when you least expect it. After everything that happened with Clara, I never imagined I'd feel like myself again. I spent so many nights questioning what went wrong, wondering how I could ever rebuild after something so painful. But as time passed, something started to shift within me. It was slow at first, almost imperceptible, but eventually, I started to feel a sense of freedom. Freedom from the weight of the past, freedom from the guilt and the anger that had consumed me. I began to realize that there was life beyond the heartbreak, that there was more waiting for me if I could find the strength to move forward. The first few months were difficult, there's no doubt about that. There were days when the loneliness felt unbearable, when the silence in the house reminded me too much of what I had lost. But there were also days, small victories, really, when I felt the tiniest spark of something I hadn't felt in years. Joy, hope, a sense of possibility. I started going for walks again, spending time in nature, breathing in the fresh air that had once seemed so ordinary. But now, it felt like a reminder that life was still out there, that I wasn't stuck in my grief forever. I started reconnecting with friends. Mark, of course, was there every step of the way, but there were others too. I hadn't realized how much I had distanced myself from the people who cared about me. It wasn't intentional. It was just easier to stay locked in my own pain, to keep to myself, to pretend everything was fine. But now, I made an effort. I reached out to people I had lost touch with. I started going to dinner with old friends, meeting new people, engaging in life again. And slowly, I began to rediscover parts of myself I had forgotten. I joined a local book club, something I had always wanted to do but never made the time for. I took up photography, something that had always intrigued me but that I had brushed aside in the busyness of my life. The more I immersed myself in these new, simple pleasures, the more I felt like I was finding the man I had been before, the man I had lost in the shadow of my marriage. And then, something unexpected happened. I met someone. Her name was Lily, and she was unlike anyone I had ever known. She was kind, funny, and full of life in a way that felt like a breath of fresh air. We met at one of the social events I had reluctantly agreed to attend, and something clicked almost immediately. There was no rush, no pressure, just two people getting to know each other, sharing stories and laughter. And for the first time in a long time, I felt the stirrings of something that felt real, something that had nothing to do with the past. I wasn't looking for love. I wasn't even sure I was ready for it. But life has a way of surprising you when you least expect it. We spent more time together, talking, laughing, sharing our experiences, and somewhere along the way, I realized that I was opening up again. Not just to her, but to life itself. I had closed myself off for so long, afraid of getting hurt again. But Lily showed me that it was possible to be vulnerable, to trust again, without carrying the weight of past mistakes. Months passed, and I found myself healing in ways I didn't think were possible. Clara's departure no longer consumed my every thought. The anger I had once felt toward her had faded, replaced by a deep understanding of the need for growth and change. I wasn't angry at her anymore. I had come to accept that she had made her choices, and I had made mine. And in doing so, I was free. Free from the past. Free from the bitterness that had clouded my mind for so long. Lily and I grew closer, and one evening, after a simple dinner at a quiet cafe, she took my hand and said something that took me by surprise. "You know," she said softly, "I've never met anyone who's been through so much, but still manages to look at the world with hope. It's inspiring." Those words hit me harder than I expected. I had always thought of myself as just getting by, just surviving. But here was someone seeing me in a way I hadn't seen myself in years. Maybe I was stronger than I gave myself credit for. Maybe there was something worth holding on to after all. That night, as I walked home with Lily by my side, I realized that the road ahead wasn't so frightening anymore. It wasn't perfect, nothing ever is, but it was mine to walk, and that was enough. I had survived the storm, and now I was learning how to find my way in the calm. In a way, Clara's leaving had been the catalyst I needed to rediscover myself. The pain, the heartbreak, it had forced me to look inward, to re-examine my life. And in doing so, I had come out stronger. I had learned to embrace the unknown, to take small steps toward a new future. And while I would always carry the scars of the past, they no longer defined me. I wasn't the same man I was before Clara left. I was someone different, someone who had endured and come out the other side. The journey hadn't been easy, and it still wasn't. But for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of peace, a quiet confidence in the knowledge that, no matter what happened next, I would be okay. The future was uncertain, but it was mine to shape. And that, I realized, was enough.